Episode 46, The Great Train Wreck of 1918, and Others. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is Poisoned Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed last week's episode on the Hart brothers, America's first serial killers. Man, they were some rough dudes. And violent. Today I want to talk about another true story, The Great Train Wreck of 1918. Actually, 1918 was a horrible year for train wrecks, so I plan on covering a couple more in this episode. But the main one will be the Great Train Wreck of 1918. This one occurred in Nashville, Tennessee, and caused the death of at least 110 people, maybe more. The railroad was a vital part of Appalachia, a way to connect to the eastern seaboard to the other side of the Appalachian Mountains. The Baltimore and Ohio was the first to cross. It was finished in Piedmont, Virginia on July 21st, 1851. Fairmont on June 22nd, 1852, and its terminus at Wheeling on January 1st, 1853. The Southern Railway linked Charleston, South Carolina, and Memphis, Tennessee, crossing in Appalachia in 1857 in the Asheville, North Carolina area, although rail expansion halted with the start of the Civil War. By 1867, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway had reached the eastern edge of the mountains and was also reaching the Ohio Valley via the New River and Kanawha valleys of West Virginia. Henry G. Davis started the West Virginia Central and Pittsburgh Railway in 1880. In the ensuing years, it opened a huge swath of timber and coal territory in northern West Virginia to use. It started in Piedmont, West Virginia, and pushed into creating such towns as Elkins, Davis, and Thomas. It pushed east to Cumberland, Maryland, where it connected with the train from the C&O Canal and the National Road, where west from Elkins, Davis created the Coal and Coke Railway to Charleston, completing another crossing. These eventually formed the core of the Western Maryland Railway. The Western Maryland's Connellsville extension was built from Cumberland to Connellsville, Pennsylvania, beginning around 1906 and was completed in 1912. So trains were a primary source of transportation in Appalachia. I just wanted to cover that before I go into the story. The Great Train Wreck of 1918 occurred July 9th, 1918 in Nashville, Tennessee. Two passenger trains operated by the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway collided head-on, costing at least 101 lives and injuring an additional 171. It's considered the worst rail accident in U.S. history, though estimates of the death toll of this accident overlap with that of the Malbone street wreck in Brooklyn, New York, the same year. And I actually will cover that in this episode too. This wreck here is also known as the Dutchman's Curve train wreck, which sounds more ominous to me, kind of like a country song. I may switch back and forth according to where I get my information from, but just know that the Great Train Wreck of 1918 and Dutchman's Curve train wreck are the same thing. The accident occurred on the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway when train number 4 departed westward from Union Station and collided with number 1 train that was inbound from Memphis. They were both traveling on a single-track line that was known as Dutchman's Curve. At 7:07 on the day of the accident, the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway train number 4 departed from Union Station in Nashville, bound for Memphis. The train pulled locomotive number 282, a G8 Class 460 10-wheeler built by Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1905. It consisted of 2 mail and baggage cars and 6 wooden coaches. Meanwhile, Train 1, pulled by locomotive number 281, also a G8 Class 460 10-wheeler built by Baldwin in 1905, was heading into Nashville from Memphis, containing 1 baggage car, 6 wooden coaches, and 2 Pullman sleeping cars of steel construction. Train number 1 had departed McKenzie 4 hours earlier and passed Bellevue at 7:09 a.m., 35 minutes behind schedule. While trains ran on long stretches of double tracks, there was also a 10-mile stretch of single track on the western outskirts of Nashville. According to policy at the time, inbound trains were given right-of-way, meaning train number 4 would need to yield to train number 1 if the latter hadn't completed the section. Aware of the single-track section, radio dispatch relayed information regarding number 1 to the crew of number 4, along with yielding instructions. Dispatch instructed the number 4 to visually confirm passing the number 1 on the double tracks by the time it reached the interlocking tower known as Shops Junction. If the crew was unable to do so, the number 4 was to stop while on the double track. Human error caused the incident. The conductor of train number 1 overheard a passing switch engine while collecting tickets and mistakenly assumed it was number 4 passing as instructed. However, the crew failed to visually identify the train as required. To make matters worse, train number 4 was given the signal to proceed along the single track by mistake. Finally, the crew of number 4 failed to check if train number 1 had arrived at the junction before proceeding as required by the railway's management. While train number 4 traversed the double track section, the conductor delegated the responsibility of identifying number 1 to the remainder of his crew. While collecting tickets, the conductor mistook the sound of a passing switch engine with the empty passenger cars in number 1. The crew either made the same error while were negligent in properly identifying the train. As number 4 approached the interlocking tower at Shops Junction, tower operator J.S. Johnson showed a clear signal from the tower's train order signals, indicating all was clear. As he stopped to record the train in his logs, Johnson noticed that there was no entry showing the opposing from number 1 had passed. Johnson reported to the dispatcher, who telegraphed, "He meets number 1 there. Can you stop him?" Johnson sounded the emergency whistle, but there was no one at the rear of number 4 to hear it. The train passed on the assumption that the clear train order board indicated that the line ahead was clear. Also, the engineman and conductor failed to visually inspect the train register at Shops Junction to ascertain as to whether number 1 had yet arrived. That was required by operating instructions issued by the railroad's management prior to the wreck. As the trains rumbled down the Tennessee tracks at upwards of 60 miles per hour toward each other, there were 3 chances to prevent this deadly accident, and crews from both trains failed to make them. Making matters even worse was the fact that the stretch of track was also an area that featured multiple curves, which limited how far ahead the engineers could see. With multiple opportunities to avoid an accident missed due to human error, the 2 trains collided at the point known as Dutchman's Curve in Belle Meade, which was about 5 miles west of Nashville, at approximately 7:20 a.m. It's estimated that the westbound train was traveling about 50 miles per hour, while the Nashville-bound train was running at 60 miles per hour. Many of the wooden cars were crushed or hurled sideways. The impact of the 2 locomotives ramming into each other caused both trains to derail with a thunderous boom that could be heard for miles. The wreck was catastrophic, as more than 120 people died and 170 were injured. Local reports indicate that about 40,000 people rushed to the scene of the accident to help survivors, many of whom were African-American laborers en route to a job site. In a sad twist of fate, it was to have been the last trip for the engineer of the Nashville-bound train before his retirement. Officials from the Interstate Commerce Commission, ICC, determined the crews in train number 4 and the railroad's towers failed to account for the presence of train number 1. The commission also found that there was a lack of proper safety systems in place to track positions of trains. The nation's safety regulations for train operations would be greatly influenced by the mistakes made on this day. The ICC listed the dead at 101, though some reports had the death toll as high as 121. At least 171 people were injured. Many of the victims were black laborers from Arkansas and Memphis who were coming to work at a gunpowder plant in Old Hickory outside of Nashville. As many as 50,000 people came to the track to help that day, to rescue survivors, search for loved ones, or simply witness the tragic scene, which is probably what most of them were doing, if we were honest here. In its official report, the ICC was harsh on the NC and St. Louis. I don't like that. In its official report, the ICC was harsh on the North Chattanooga and St. Louis. A combination of poor operating practices, human error, and lax enforcement of operating rules led to the worst passenger train wreck in U.S. history. Had the tower operator properly left a signal at the danger, had the conductor monitored his train's progress rather than entrusting it to a subordinate, or had the crew inspected the train register at Shops Junction as required, the accident would not have happened. Safety laws weren't the only change produced by this tragedy. The ICC noted that the wooden cars of each train contributed significantly to the injuries and deaths of the incident. After this accident, the nation's railroads began using passenger cars made from steel, a material that offers much more protection to occupants than wood. While some railroad operators were moving towards passenger cars made from steel before the train wreck, the accident was a catalyst for many operators to make the switch quickly. Following the train wreck, both locomotives were repaired and re-entered in service for the North Chattanooga and St. Louis Railway. Both locomotives would go on to have full careers with the railroad before being retired shortly after World War II. The track, now located west of St. Thomas West Hospital, is still in use under the control of CSX Transportation System since the 1980 merger between the Chessie System and the Seaboard Coastline Railroad. I mentioned the Malbone Street wreck and want to cover it. Some say it was deadlier than Dutchman's Curve wreck. I think it just depends on how you look at it. So this one actually has a different reason that it happened. During the 1910s, the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company was in contact with the city of New York to construct new subway lines and upgrade older lines in partnership with the Interborough Rapid Transit Company. At a time, transit history known as the Dual Contracts Era. On September 25, 1918, a newly constructed tunnel under Malbone Street opened to accommodate the growth of the subway system. The new tunnel, which would allow trains to pass over a new connection for the subway, was constructed with a sharp S curve. Train operators were instructed to travel at a maximum of 6 miles per hour to ensure safety. At the time the tunnel opened, there was a strife between the Brooklyn Rail Rapid Transit Company and the union known as the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. When negotiations failed between the two, the Brotherhood called on motormen and motor switchmen to strike on November 1st, 1918. The Malbone Street wreck was also known as the Brighton Beach Line accident and was a rapid transit railroad accident that occurred on November 1st, 1918 on the New York City subway's BMT Brighton Line. In the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn in New York City, a speeding train derailed in the sharply curved tunnel beneath Willink Plaza, the intersection of Flatbush Avenue, Ocean Avenue, and Malbone Street, now known as Empire Boulevard. On September 25th, 1918, a newly constructed tunnel under Malbone Street opened to accommodate the growth of the subway system. The circumstances leading to the crash included a labor strike against the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company. The BRT had tried to keep service running with non-striking personnel and decided to use Antonio Edward Luciano, a crew dispatcher with no experience operating the line. Other factors in the crash included the serpentine layout of the track and weight of the individual train cars. In the aftermath of the crash, Luciano and BRT officials were placed on trial for manslaughter. Ultimately, all the defendants were acquitted for their indictments, or their indictments were dropped. The BRT gradually phased out wooden cars and additional train protection devices were installed. The two most heavily damaged train cars were scrapped. In 1923, the BRT became the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company, having gone bankrupt due to the accident. A tunnel in which the wreck occurred remained in daily passenger operation for 40 years. A memorial to the crash was installed in 2019. Now, I feel like the company wanted Luciano to be their scapegoat, but the poor guy was just in a bad circumstance. I got most of this from the American Experience website. It said Luciano's career as a motorman has started earlier that very day when the BRT pressed the 23-year-old dispatcher into service after the company motorman went out on strike. Weakened by a recent bout with influenza and emotionally anguished by the death of one of his children from the flu the week before, Luciano nonetheless complied with the employer's wishes. Already that day, he had completed a full shift running a train on the Culver Line with little difficulty, but the Brighton Beach Line presented challenges that taxed the skills of even experienced motormen, including steep downhill plunges and a difficult S-turn at the entrance to Malbone Street Tunnel. The train was now running at rush hour when the schedule demanded speed and the cars were packed to capacity. Fatigued from his first shift and eager to finish his second, Luciano set his train in motion and made the inbound from Manhattan to Brooklyn over the Brooklyn Bridge without incident. The return trip, however, would be considerably more eventful. Hampered by darkness and the vagaries of a system in disarray, signal operators sent Luciano's train on the wrong course at Franklin Avenue. Luciano discovered the error, stopped the train, and reversed direction with the help of a signal crew. Back on course, he headed toward a steep downhill grade and the sharp curve entering the Malbone Tunnel. The posted speed for the tunnel entrance was 6 miles per hour. Witnesses estimated that Luciano's train entered the curve at over 30. The train's first car hung precariously to the track and derailed upon entering the tunnel. The second car slammed violently into a concrete abutment, losing his roof and one of its sides on the impact. The third car disintegrated into a tangled mess of wood and glass. Dozens of passengers died immediately, many of them decapitated or impaled by shards of wood and glass. Others were electrocuted by the third rail, which had been shut down on derailment, but was turned back on by off-site monitors who attributed the shutdown to labor sabotage. Rescuers rushed to the station to help the dazed and injured and to carry away the dead. The power failure in the tunnel posed a problem for rescuers, but that was partially solved when automobiles pulled up near the entrance to the station to illuminate the ghastly scene. The wooden 5-car train was crowded with 650 passengers rushing south at an accelerated speed on the tracks of today's Franklin Avenue shuttle. At 6:42, the train had approached the S-curve in the tracks in approximately 30 miles per hour, which was 24 miles over the speed limit, which is what caused the wooden train to derail. So, I mean, it's a miracle that only 100 people died, really. But it is still the worst subway accident in New York City history. Perhaps the most significant impact of the Malbone Street wreck was that the tragedy fundamentally altered the transit system's approach to safety and crew and passengers. The wreck led to important decisions such as stricter training and requirements for motormen, phasing out the wooden train cars and subway tunnels by replacing them with composite wood and steel cars, and ultimately fully metal body cars, improving signal systems and installing onboard train controls to guard against excessive speed. Malbone Street was renamed and is known today as Empire Boulevard, and while the tragic events of the day have faded from public memory, transit workers ensured that one powerful reminder would remain. The switch that restored power to the tracks in the Malbone Street 100 years ago is still present at the nearby Prospect Park electrical substation. Both of these wrecks had wooden cars, and that's where most of the damage came from. It's a shame that either of them happened, but at least it motivated the railroad to change to modern steel cars. The next one I want to mention actually happened earlier in the year, before the other two, and while not quite as tragic, still an awful thing. The Hammond Circus train wreck occurred on June 2nd, 1918, as one of the worst train wrecks in U.S. history. 86 people were reported to have died, and another 127 were injured when a locomotive engineer fell asleep and ran his troop train into the rear of a circus train near Hammond, Indiana. The circus train held 400 performers and roustabouts of the Hagenbeck Wallace Circus. The train used by the Hagenbeck Wallace Circus used old wooden cars that were lit with oil lamps. The circus train had two train segments. The segment that was loaded with animals had been dispatched earlier, leaving the train with all the performers and workers on the track. As you all know, I'm an animal lover, so I'm glad the animals were okay, but still, this is tragic. The cars were being moved to a spot near Hammond, Indiana, so a mechanical problem could be addressed, and some of the cars had been left on the main line track. In early morning hours of June 22nd, 1918, engineer Alonzo Sargent was at the throttle of a Michigan Central, then a subsidiary of the New York Central Railroad, troop train pulled by Class K80 462 Pacific, number 8485. It was pulling 20 empty Pullman cars. Sargent, who was aware that the train was closely following a circus train, had slept little, if at all, the preceding 24 hours. The effect of a lack of sleep, several heavy meals, some kidney pills, and the gentle rolling of his locomotive are thought to have caused him to fall asleep at the controls. The circus had just completed two performances in Michigan City, Indiana, and was traveling overnight the 45 miles to nearby Hammond. The first train carrying workers, many of the circus animals, cruised on to its destination with no problems, but engineers on the second train halted their progress to fix a hot box. The overheated axle bearing could cause a fire on the train if not dealt with immediately. It was around 4 a.m. when the second train pulled off into a side track, but the last 5 cars, including 4 wooden sleeper cars, remained on the main track. As the engineers worked and the performers slept, an empty train used to transport soldiers to the East Coast for subsequent deployment to the war front in Europe came barreling down the main track. The driver blew past several stop signs, and then the lamps of several of the circus engineers trying desperately to stop the oncoming train. But the train's steel-frame Pullman cars smashed into the wooden circus coaches at speeds between 25 and 60 miles per hour, according to contemporaneous newspaper reports. The sound of the collision was so loud that nearby farmers awoke and hurried to see what had happened. Many of the 86 who were killed in the train wreck perished in the first 35 seconds after the collision. Then the wreckage caught on fire. Fire was so intense that many of the victims were assumed to be some of the African-American porters on the train, until further investigation revealed that they had been severely burned. Among the dead were Arthur Dierkes and Mac Knightsburn of the Great Dierkes Brothers, a strongman act, and Jenny Ward Todd of the Flying Wards. There were also 127 injuries. The wreck is described in great detail in the report of the Joint Interstate Commerce Commission and Indiana Public Service Commission following an investigation. Sargent, who was under arrest, refused to testify at any of the hearings on advice of his counsel. The ICC report concluded this accident was caused by engine man Sargent being asleep and from this cause failing to observe the stop indication of automatic signal 2581 and the warnings of the flagman and of the circus train, and to be governed by them. The report was also critical of older wooden cars whose oil lamps ignited the fire immediately after the collision. Although Sargent and his fireman Gustav Klaus were criminally charged in Lake County, Indiana, following a trial, the jury found itself deadlocked and a mistrial was declared. Prosecutors declined to retry the case, and charges were dismissed on June 9, 1920. Interestingly enough, the train wreck occurred on a Saturday, and its effects caused the Hagenbeck Wallace Circus show in Hammond and another in Monroe, Wisconsin on June 24th to be canceled. However, the circus performed on June 25th in Wisconsin, with other circuses providing some of the acts. In the following weeks, 53 of the deceased performers were offered a burial in a large plot at Woodlawn Cemetery in Chicago, which had just been purchased by the Showmen's League, a fraternal order created in 1913 to support men and women in show business. Only 5 victims have marked graves. The rest were burned too badly to be identified. When the coffins arrived, more than 1,500 mourners gathered to pay their respects. The graves were memorialized with a stone elephant, its trunk drooping in sadness. One final wreck I want to cover occurred in 1904, but it was pretty similar to the Great Train Wreck of 1918, so I just wanted to mention it really quickly. The New Market train wreck happened when 2 Southern Railway passenger trains traveling at great speed collided head-on near New Market, Tennessee on Saturday, September 24, 1904, killing at least 56 passengers and crew and injuring 106. Trains concerned were the number 15 westbound local passenger train, pulled by 440, number 1838, from Bristol to Knoxville, with 3 cars carrying 140 passengers, and the number 12 eastbound Carolina special, pulled by 460, number 1051, from Chattanooga to Salisbury, North Carolina. The line was a single track, and the normal procedure to allow the trains to pass was for the local train to stop on the side of the Hodges Switch. But when the engineer stopped at Morristown, he was given special orders to stop in the siding at New Market instead. Both of the conductor and the engineer signaled that they had read the order, but later the conductor told a reporter that he had misread it. After stopping at New Market, the train should have stopped after a few hundred yards onto the side track, but it didn't. Meanwhile, the Carolina Special had reached Strawberry Plains. It comprised 9 cars, 2 mail cars, 3 wooden passenger coaches, and 4 steel Pullman cars. Many of its 210 passengers were returning from Louisiana Purchase Exposition, also known as the St. Louis World's Fair. As it drew out of the station, a telegraph arrived from New Market from a horrified depot staff. It read, "Number 15 has run the switch and is on the main line." But it was too late. Despite waving the arms and throwing stones at it, no one aboard the special noticed as the train gathered speed. There was one last chance to warn the trains. A telegraph was sent to Hodges Switch, the normal passing place, but no one was on duty, and the message was never received. The trains met on New Market Hill at 10:18. The special managed to gather speed on the upgrade and was traveling at 60 miles per hour. The local on the downgrade was traveling to make up lost time and attained 70 miles per hour. When they saw each other, the emergency brakes were applied, but the trains collided at a combined speed of over 100 miles per hour. The crash could be heard 15 miles away. Both engineers were killed. The locomotive and its coal tender of the local train were catapulted into the air, turning upside down until they flew over the special's engines. Tender and baggage cars landing squarely on top of the wooden passenger cars, which were also struck from behind by the weight of the sturdy steel Pullman cars, which remained relatively undamaged. In 7 seconds, the wooden coaches were crushed like eggshells. Death was quick for most, with many of the victims decapitated or horribly mangled. Splintered timbers, iron, and steel were piled in chaotic masses over the rails, mingling with human bodies. When news of the crash reached Knoxville, a relief train was organized to bring doctors and medical supplies to the site to take to the injured Knoxville General Hospital. Reporters also managed to board the train, with many photographs of the scene were made. The official death toll was counted at 56, with 106 injured, though some estimates suggest the death toll could have been over 100. The inquiry could not determine why the engineer and fireman of the number 15 had not stopped on the side tracks at New Market, as both were killed by the collision. The engineer may have been asleep. I just thought that one was pretty similar to the Dutchman's curve wreck, and I wanted to include it here. Thankfully, train travel is a lot safer today than it was then. Hopefully no disasters like that will ever happen again. One thing for sure, 1918 was not a good year for train travel. So that's about it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, thank you for listening. You can follow me on social media under Poison Appalachia. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Lemonade, TikTok, Blue Sky, and YouTube. If you could, on the podcast platform you listen to, please like and rate me and share me. Let everyone know about my podcast. Let's get the word out. Thanks and have a great week.